So hello and welcome to this webinar of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, Procurement Power, What About Disability? My name is Jürgen Menze. I'm an ILO Disability Inclusion Specialist and the coordinator of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. I'm a middle-aged white man with a beard and as always a light blue shirt. I'm just here to open up the webinar with some welcoming remarks and some housekeeping remarks. Of course, we're happy to have you with us. In terms of how we organize this webinar today, you are, and I see some of you are already introducing themselves in the chat, and please do so to connect with each other and tell each other who you are and where you work and what you're interested in terms of this webinar. However, any questions you have to the panelists, please put them in the Q&A function, the Q&A box that we have in Zoom, should be usually at the bottom of your screen. And there we can then choose at the end of the webinar the questions we want to put to the panelists. Just maybe for those of you who have never connected to a webinar of the Global Business and Disability Network, the Global Business and Disability Network is a coming together of 40 multinational enterprises and at country level, 40 what we call national business and disability network, all united to make workplaces around the world more inclusive of persons with disabilities. Procurement is one of the latest topics that we focus on. And just also for you to know, at our Global Annual Conference 2024 at the end of November, we will also launch a guide on supply chains, in which, of course, procurement also plays a major role. With that said, I'll pass it on to Susan Scott Parker, who will be the moderator of today's webinar. So Susan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, and welcome to everyone. So glad you're able to join us today on this incredibly important issue. This is a real opportunity to look at procurement's strategic role in enabling the business to deliver the best practice that also benefits the world's more than 1.3 billion people with disabilities. So our panel is going to be looking at a range of ways in which business can use procurement to actually drive the business improvements that in effect also benefit disabled people. So we're looking at a range of opportunities for procurement, ultimately leading to the point where suppliers who can demonstrate that they share their commitment and their expertise in terms of enabling disability equality and inclusion gain competitive advantage. So we've got initiatives like G3 ICTs, Procurement Impact Alliance, encouraging procurement as allies of people with disabilities and as a contribution to their ESG agenda to simply send out the ILO's self-assessment tool to some of their suppliers, particularly in low-income countries, to help them get a better understanding of what best practice now looks like. And of course, to encourage them to join and support and benefit from their local national business disability networks. We're looking at how we enable key suppliers to actually meet explicit key performance indicators when they have a direct impact on how quickly and fairly and efficiently the organization adapts and makes adjustments and accommodations for people with disabilities as applicants and, of course, as employees. We're looking at how do you ensure the level of accessibility of technology and of the built environment that is fundamental if we're going to get this right. And of course, we're also focusing on how do we bring disabled-owned businesses into the value chains, the supply chains that so many global companies manage on a daily basis. We've also got the opportunity to look, because we have the East Africa Breweries with us, at a particular example of best practice in that regard. And of course, one of my particular concerns is what is procurement's role when it comes to protecting the business from legal and reputation risk and harm, particularly, of course, with a reference to when they're procuring HR technology. Now, this entire discussion, of course, is taking place in the context of the European Union's Accessibility Act coming into play next year, which explicitly states that all member states must use common accessibility requirements in public procurement. Where is that going to take us? It sounds brilliant. So our panel today, I'm going to introduce them now so that we can then move quickly from panel member to panel member. We've got Christopher Lee, who's the Managing Director of G3 ICT, We've got Andy Garrett as Global Workplace Adjustments and Accessibility Director at GSK. His colleague Nitin Kapoor, Vice President, Strategy, Systems and Process, GSK Procurement. We have Waithera Mwai, Head of Communication for East Africa Breweries, and Julia Jin from the ILO, who is the ILO's custodian of disability inclusive procurement for the entire United Nations Disability Strategy. Absolutely brilliant. So I'm really looking forward to this. And so we're going to start. I'm going to hand over to Christopher Lee. I think you're based in the States this morning, this afternoon, this evening, Chris. It's all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. And it is great to be here today. And Susan, thank you for all your work, as well as others on the call in this very important topic. As Susan mentioned, my name is Christopher Lee. I'm the VP and Managing Director of G3 ICT. And G3 ICT was launched back in 2006 through the United Nations, really in the passing of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So our whole focus around G3 ICT is really promoting the convention and the work around it and the goals. We also really focus, in doing that, we really focus on building a community of advocates and really focusing on human rights with people with disabilities. We work with advocates, not only them, but also the industry leaders, UN officials, to promote accessibility in the built environment as well as the digital environment. We promote awareness and implementation through solutions by aligning strategic partners, engaging with the SMEs, and participating in building and promoting programs, projects, and initiatives that really focus on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. We do this in three primary ways. One of it is through advocacy, and we do that through capacity building through activities. And this really was important at the very beginning, back in 2006, where we travel around to countries, specifically low-income countries, to look at supporting the convention and around mostly awareness. And now we're doing more of the implementation phase. We also have advisory services that we work on. That's around maturity models, working with smart cities around good practices, and particularly in the area of procurement, where we have, over the last 6 years, gone into different cities to make sure that they are aware of procurement best practices, and working with them on adopting different policies and procedures to improve the procurement of products and services within the cities. One of the primary areas that G3ICT is focused on is this procurement area, and buying products and services that are not inclusive to everyone, and making sure that there's no holes in those products and services as we are purchasing these. So we have several initiatives around that particular area. So we're excited to be in here today. I did want to mention just a little bit about the Alliance and the benefits of joining the Alliance. The Alliance will enable participants to incorporate, to report to the ESG's value add to investors, regulators, and other key stakeholders. It will also allow you, as Susan mentioned earlier, link into this self-assessment tool that is easy and free to participate in, that will look at achievable performance standards. And the Alliance will also help the members and suppliers comply with these ESG's regulations while optimizing scoring, reporting, and planning best business practices. So Susan, again, thank you for the invitation today. I'm looking forward to the panel. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And G3ICT has taken such a leadership role on the accessibility when procuring technology. You didn't quite make enough of that, I suspect, but we'll come back to that because I'm sure that's a real interest of our attendees today. So that takes us to Andy Garrett. Andy, GSK, of course, a leading member of the Global Business and Disability Network. You've got some good stories to tell, but I'm particularly interested in what you've been doing in your conversations with facilities management, given the key role that plays in making sure you can flex the environment in such a way that people can contribute and do their best. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Susan, and hello, everyone. Delighted to be joining you today. Always enjoying working with ILO and its extended networks in making the world more accessible and inclusive. I've been at GSK for just coming up 8 years. My core role is leading our process, which I'm proud is an award-winning process at GSK for responding to workplace adjustments requests. We've demedicalized the model. We use a trust-based approach. And in fact, my function in terms of responding to the requests from employees and service users around adjustments sits in our real estate and facilities function part of GSK. And that dovetails nicely with some other work that I'm doing around the real estate and the facilities management environment to make those services more responsive and more accessible. Clearly, many organizations work with a number of outsourced partners, whether that be in facilities, technology, learning and development. You know, we buy, as business owners and buyers, we buy an awful lot of outsourced goods and services into our organization to enable us to do what we do in terms of developing medicines to help people around the world. And of course, it's really important that we think about accessibility by design of those goods and services. So within the facilities management world, it's not enough just to say that we respond to adjustments and accessibility requests, but also to our other infrastructure. You know, can we be more specific within our processes about how we respond to those requests? How quickly can we set some structural KPIs to measure the output? So in addition to our workplace adjustments response, we've worked hard at GSK to look at how can we be more proactive to build accessibility inclusion by design, by setting some standards. We started with our real estate and setting what we call inclusive design standards for our built environment, and that's the built infrastructure. And picking up from that learning, we've been working with work streams across the organization in HR, in technology, and in procurement to look at what standards can we put in place. You know, procurement helps people across the organization at GSK to bring goods and services into our organizations. They might offer us templates and guidance around requests for proposals, scope of work documents, and also setting up contracts with our vendors and suppliers. You know, and there's opportunity, huge opportunity here for procurement to impact that, to remind buyers of the value and importance of making those solutions that GSK is bringing into our organization accessible for everyone. So I think there's an enormous opportunity here to help develop perhaps some of those KPIs, some of that guidance to enable people through the procurement channel to better support their buying channels with setting expectations, behaviors, standards even around accessibility and inclusion. Back to you, Susan.
Thank you. That was a very concise summary of months and months of work, Andy. I think we have to come back to you with some questions in a moment. But the big message for me is that you've been looking not just at accessibility, barrier-free for group poses. You know, millions of gadgets at a time, not one light bulb for someone who gets migraines because of that one light bulb. So I want to go now to your colleague in GSK procurement to ask Nitin, how have you figured this all out, Nitin? What is your response to Andy's challenge? How do you describe the role that procurement plays in the middle of this complex challenge?
Thanks, Susan. A real pleasure to be here and to talk to everybody on this particular panel regarding what we do at GSK. You've just heard from Andy some of the impressive activities that we have undertaken to be as inclusive an employer as we can be. As I was introduced, my name is Nitin Kapoor. I've been working at GSK for the last 12 years. And the reason why we get out of bed is to help patients with medicines and vaccines. And it's a really inspiring job that we do. But we absolutely recognize that the job that I have within global procurement is a really, really interesting one. Many people will describe procurement in many ways, but fundamentally what we do is we connect the best of the outside world in the form of suppliers and vendors and companies who do amazing things on this planet to the right people within GSK who are looking for those requirements, if they be goods or services. That's pretty much the job of any procurement organization. And when it comes to us at GSK, yeah, we're active across many of our employee resource groups, so what we affectionately call ERGs within GSK, and we have a presence in order to try and make sure that we can help the company spend its money wisely and spend money on the areas which can help us be a better business overall. So what does that mean for disability inclusion? I think Susan was kind enough to kind of explain things like disabled-owned businesses. They're an important part of the type of companies we want to engage. And in some parts of the world, there are better ecosystems and better certification organizations that really help us identify disabled-owned businesses. And of course, we tap into those databases and try and appreciate who has the right capabilities in this particular area, who can really help us meet those internal requirements we have. You heard from Andy about workplace adjustments. And if I use that as an example, it's not the only area, but I just want to use that as an example to just kind of showcase as well that many a time when we are expanding our footprint or changing our presence around the world, the requirements of what we're looking for might be clear. And that's the first job that procurement does, is works with parts of the business to understand what it is that they're looking to buy. But then we also have to go and understand if there's an external marketplace available for us to be able to buy this from. So are there suppliers and vendors who have these capabilities? And most recently, we were expanding our footprint and operations in South Asia. And yeah, we had to work very closely with Andy and his team to try and figure out, well, actually, the suppliers that we've been using across multiple geographies don't have a presence in certain parts of the world. How do we either help them expand and provide those goods and services for us in new geographies, or as alternatively, develop suppliers in that local geography to be able to provide what we're looking for. So when it came to workplace adjustments, we partnered very closely to try and expand our footprint and really help grow. That's just one idea that kind of gives, that's just one example that gives you an idea about what exactly it is that that procurement organizations do. But if I was to kind of distill it and make it fairly simple for people to understand, once we understand what that business requirement is and make sure that we challenge that so that we are thinking to be inclusive of people within our organizations and externally, and assess that requirement, our job is then supply selection. How do we then make sure at point of supply selection, and you will hear words like RFPs and tenders and various technical words used by procurement organizations, but all that does is it allows us to assess the different capabilities that third parties bring and use criteria that we're looking for to select a third party or a vendor to work with. So that's the first part of this exercise that procurement organizations do. After that, of course, there's contracting and various other technical steps that we work on. But then the channels that we set up. So even if we've approved suppliers, put in contracts with them, if we don't make that supplier accessible to people within the organization, then using that third party is still a challenge. So you heard a little bit about buying channels. I'm actually kind of quite excited that people outside the geeky world of procurement talk about buying channels, but they are really, really important because they make the work that we've done as an organization accessible to everyone in the company. So if someone's looking for buying a specific, for an example, a chair or a specific table or desk, etc. How do you make sure that those items are available either through catalogs or easily searchable in internal platforms for our shoppers and buyers within GSK, who then engage with those platforms? So I think catalogs is one very good way in which we do this, but there are many more channels, buying channels, that we make available, including how we can do this at pace. Many times the speed of delivery of, if they are goods or services, matters as much as what constitutes those, and having an idea of how suppliers are able to fulfill that is part of the role that we play as an organization, supporting our business owners across the world. The other thing that we also do is we hold these suppliers accountable to make sure that they are delivering what they said they will. So it's all well and good that at point of selection, you can ask for lots of questions. Does a supplier comply with XYZ standard? That might be really important to us. But if they're not able to execute on those, or not fulfill that requirement, then we've got a challenge and a problem as well for ourselves. So helping ensure that we work with suppliers that they can deliver to the standard that they've promised. And where that's not possible, we work with them to either lift their standards and help them on that journey, or in extreme situations, find alternates to meet our particular requirements. And the loop starts again. You go back and appreciate if the requirements are being met or not. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of what procurement organizations do. We work with various other certification organizations when it comes back to disability-owned businesses, and we're very proud to be able to bring them into our supplier base. But it doesn't stop at that. And I think you heard Susan talk a little bit about this new explosion of AI that's happening, and how people are using technology when it comes to evaluating CVs, or in some cases videos of people who are answering questions. And we're very acutely aware that that creates a real challenge in the selection. So we do work with third parties and follow all the right guidelines. And some of them are very new. These guidelines on how you work with third parties in this new world of AI are changing rapidly, and they do vary quite a lot. Some of it based on legislation in different parts of the world, and how we work with third parties to make sure we're as inclusive as we can be continues to be a challenge, and will be a challenge as the area develops rapidly as well. So I'd probably leave you with that, and I'll hand back to Susan, and I'd be super happy to answer any specific questions that any of the other procurement aficionados may have, but more in general as well. Really excited to be participating on this panel. Back to you, Susan.
Well, thank you very much, Nitin. We could have an entire hour just on how you protect a company from risk in your role, when actually you don't own the decision that says we're going to buy that. Right. However, I'm not allowed to follow that line of thought. I'm now going to move happily on to invite Waithera Mwai from East Africa Breweries to tell us about her really innovative program. I was telling Waithera earlier this week, this is one of the most exemplary initiatives that I've come across when it comes to creatively looking at business need and matching it to societal opportunity and need, if you like. So Waithera, take us through what you've been up to.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening from wherever you are. As mentioned by Susan, my name is Waithera Mwai from East African Breweries Limited. And East African Breweries Limited, or EABL, is an alcohol manufacturer based, of course, in East Africa, and is a wholly owned subsidiary of Diageo. And we are champions of sustainability. So the conversation around disability inclusion sits squarely in our sustainability agenda, which we've phrased Society 2030, Spirit of Progress. And within that, we have a very big pillar around championing inclusion and diversity. So when you look at disability inclusion, we are trying to achieve a representation of persons with disabilities across the value chain. And we have a target for that, where we aim to increase representation of persons with disabilities to at least 3% across the entire value chain by 2025. And we do have a vast value chain, because you're talking about right from the farmers across the business, right until our outlets, your bars, your supermarkets, your distributorship. And so 3% might sound small, but it's in a universe of thousands of players around the supply chain. So we combined our disability inclusion agenda with another agenda, which we call Becoming Sustainable by Design, which includes supporting our smallholder farmers. Now, one of the raw materials that we use to create one of our very good products is sorghum. And so sorghum is grown by our smallholder farmers, and it's quite a marginalized group. These are people or persons with small acreage of land. And so our agenda around becoming sustainable by design for smallholder farmers was to provide improved access to agricultural skills and resources through smallholder farmer programs, and building social, economic, and environmental resilience. So you see there, we've combined two agendas or two targets of disability inclusion and smallholder farmers. Now, we then decided to do a program specifically for them, and thought through how we can support Kenyan smallholder farmers in accessing high quality agricultural inputs, extension advice, and high value markets. And so it also links farmers to corporate supply chains, business finance, and insurance products. So we had started the project, but we needed to scale it up as EABL. So we then partnered with an organization called Site Savers to promote and mainstream inclusion and diversity across our value chain through this program called the Global Labor Program. So Site Savers are the implementing partners, but USAID is the donor or the funder of the initiative. And so the program was formally launched in March 2022. And to upscale the program, we focused on rapidly bolstering disability inclusion in contract sorghum farming. And sorghum, like I mentioned, is one of the raw materials we used to manufacture one of our value beers called Senator Keg. And so we took in our contract sorghum farming through a commercial model that is economically viable for this particular marginalized group. So when we thought through it, we had some anticipated outcomes where we were recognizing and responding to the barriers that exclude farmers with disability from participating in labor markets. When we started off, we had 0 farmers with disabilities within our value chain. We also wanted to get more women and men with disabilities and their enterprises to participate confidently and honorable in labor markets, and so that they can enjoy and exercise their labor rights. We wanted to build resilience and capacity of smallholder farmers with disability to produce profitably. Now, in Kenya, you'll find farmers with disability, or farmers in general, rarely commercialize. And so without that support or that providing a market, providing those services for helping them grow, it becomes very difficult for them to succeed. So you then find that they're just farming for their own family needs. So we wanted to increase also the share of farmers with disability participating in our contracted supply chain. So the intervention to increase participation of the farmers with disabilities in our sorghum production is modeled around what we call a farmers hub. And a hub is a knowledge and resource center for smallholder farmers around a particular geographic locality. So for us in Kenya, we started the program on the western part of Kenya, to be particular in Kisumu. We selected Kisumu because we have one of our sites there, one of our plants there. And so we wanted to support the plant there by sourcing sorghum from farmers with disability to take it to that site in Kisumu. So typically a farmer's hub would consist of a hub owner or a village-based assistant with about 100 to 150 farmers. And the hub owner would link the farmers to access to credit, quality farm input, market linkages, etc. And the farmer hub owners, who are persons with disabilities, of these hubs are enabled to support and increase participation of persons with disabilities in hub activities. So farmer hubs are blended. We have persons with disabilities and we also have persons, able-bodied persons, right? And so since we started in March 22, currently we have around 700 farmers who are currently living with disabilities and supplying us with sorghum. We have still kept it with the smallholder farmers because we felt they are more marginalized and there was more impact in our support for them. And so as much as it still looks like it's small steps, we know we just recently started the project. In Kenya, we have around 40,000 farmers across both sorghum. Another big raw material for us is barley, but barley we find is usually around large-scale farmers, and so we wanted to reach these really marginalized groups who had no sources of income. A lot of them had been abandoned. If you get a disability later on in your life, it really is impactful for you, and so we wanted really to have an impactful sort of program where we could see real life examples of these farmers. And Susan, I know I had shared with you a video. I'm not sure if you want to play it at this point.
Yes, I think we have your video. Why not? I think we've got time. Could Aria do her magic for us and put the video on?
We get our grain from farmers and we targeted smallholder farmers so that we can have an impact in their lives, give them a business that they can do and thrive and get money to sustain themselves and their communities.
Traditionally, here in Kenya and most parts of Africa, farming is predominantly a male activity, partly because of control of land and land ownership.
We felt that we had a responsibility to ensure that the project we were doing was representative of the communities that we were in. So we went in and decided to support disadvantaged groups. So in our call to get more and more farmers, we look for women, we look for youth, and we look for people with disabilities.
In addition to providing a market for the farmers, we train the farmers on business skills that will enable them to deliver a good product, but also make money in the process.
Isebiro dala ka in e japuonj mosebiro nyaka kamadak. Isepuonja ni mondo kaka ikomo mondo ayud gunde mopogore gi kaka ayudono.
We entered into a partnership called the Global Labor Program, which is a funded program by USAID, and an organization called Site Savers is the implementing partner. We decided to join this partnership because we're not experts at mobilizing, say, farmers with disability, but Site Savers work with people with disability. They've been in the business for over 70 years, so they really are established.
Companies know of their social responsibility to societies. Persons with disabilities, who then also form part of the society, need to be included in development ventures all over the country. They also have a role to play in the growth of all these companies.
They assisted us, especially persons with disability. They were taking sorghum from the doorstep, and then they pay us. Like now I'm having 5 sacks. If I can't take them to the aggregator, now I'll call Julius and tell him, "Bwana, come help me take this."
Through partnerships, we're able to scale across Kenya and working together with partners who are like-minded, who have the same agenda, who really understand what we're trying to achieve. The understanding that we are not here just for the benefit of the organization, but the community as well.
When the smallholder farmers look at the time when they started interacting with EABL, they can pick a specific change that happened to them. And that for me is the biggest joy, because the smallholder farmers have many needs, but if we have played our part in meeting a part of those needs, then we would have made the society way better than we found it.
Thank you very much, Waithera. I must say, I hear the phrase economic empowerment a lot, but rarely with such meaning, such reality. Absolutely brilliant story. However, I want to move on now, if I may, to Julia Jin. And actually, that story, Julia, is a nice jump into your world at the ILO, is it not? This is a very, very nice connection. So Julia, as I mentioned when I introduced you, you're very active with promoting the United Nations Disability Strategy and looking at procurement's role and enhancing the ability of an organization like the ILO to maximize its impact worldwide. So I look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and hello, everyone. I'm Julia. I have brown mid-length hair that's currently tied in a bun, and I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a peach-colored flowery dress, and my background screen is a bird's eye view of the ILO headquarters building in Geneva, Switzerland. I am an ILO procurement officer, and many of Nitin's remarks on the approaches to the market in terms of disability inclusion really resonates with my own experiences, as well as RFPs and ITBs included, and I may have to steal from him this title of procurement aficionado. So I would very much like to thank Jürgen and Susan for the privilege to join this discussion today and to learn from all of you. The theme of this session has given me the opportunity to really reflect on what the power of procurement means for disability inclusion, and I'm very honored to share with my thoughts with you all today on this topic. I will first share some background on what Susan mentioned, the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, and on the ILO's work in disability inclusive procurement, and then focus in on 3 ways of how I see us being able to harness the power of disability inclusive procurement, which for me is 1, how we define our values in the best value for money equation. 2nd, the importance and necessity of teamwork. And 3rd, ensuring continuous learning and improvement. So some of you may already be familiar with the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, or you may have also heard it referred to as UNDIS, which is a UN system-wide approach on the inclusion of persons with disabilities as one UN. The strategy includes 15 indicators from leadership to policy through to procurement and employment, just to name a few, and they represent cross-cutting functions throughout all of our UN agencies. And at the ILO, we have specific custodians per indicator, and I am the ILO custodian for indicator 8 on disability inclusive procurement. This leads me to my first point on harnessing the power of disability inclusive procurement, on how we define value as an organization. And it's truly represented through this cross-functional, cross-departmental, silo-free approach to the value of inclusion. The UNDIS strategy and the ILO's application of it has and continues to be implemented through multi-departmental consultations and collaborations, and the value the ILO is placing on the inclusion of persons with disabilities. In the procurement context, we are tasked to defend the principle of best value for money. But how we define value is no longer simply in terms of dollars and cents. Value is starting to mean as well sustainability and addressing human rights risks, including discrimination. And you can see that not one indicator can influence change independently without the others, from leadership to creating policy, through technical departments outlining guidance and processes, all the way through to colleagues implementing and monitoring of the compliance on the ground. Are they being compliant with their contracts? This value of inclusion of persons with disabilities is needed throughout the organization to really have the most impactful and far-reaching approach. So maybe you can already see the theme of my second point on how essential teamwork is. I will illustrate this with an example of how to ensure the creation of accessible digital content for an agency. Excuse me. First, it is at the requirements definition stage that inclusion must be considered. As Andy mentioned, accessible by design. I love that term. This means ensuring your technical specifications and what you are asking of companies to provide must be clear in your tender documents. In this case of accessible digital content, this may include international accessibility standards, for example, a minimum of web content accessibility guidelines, or WCAG. There's the 2.0 AA standard. And this type of compliance could be a minimum standard that you describe as a requirement. So let's say you manage to include this requirement in your tender documents and you ask for bidding companies to provide examples to ensure that they understand this standard, this accessibility standard. Do you have someone on your evaluation panel or in your IT department who can evaluate against the standard fairly? And if, in the unlikely event that there may be a slightly higher financial cost to implement and verify compliance to the standard, do your organizational policies allow for this, however slight, additional cost? And finally, if you're able to award the contract to a vendor that demonstrates this compliance level, do you have technical colleagues monitoring for ongoing compliance during implementation of your digital products and to check that what they deliver is meeting this standard? So at the ILO, my role as procurement would be limited to that of the tendering stage, and it is only through the teamwork of our IT colleagues, our colleagues on the disability team, our communications and publications colleagues, that we could ensure that this digital accessibility standard could be meaningfully incorporated into a tender procurement process and ultimately lead to successful implementation. Well, this brings me to my third and last point on ensuring continuous learning and improvement. And here I would like to underscore the importance of consultations with persons with disabilities and having an understanding of whether the standards or measures put in place are serving the needs. We can have the values, we can have the common understanding and the teamwork, but there may be further technological developments or an evolution of the needs of your organization, as well as the needs identified for reasonable accommodation and accessibility. There needs to be this feedback loop to ensure that our procurement actions are consistently meeting our organization's business requirements. And at the ILO, the disability team and our procurement department co-developed guidance for our colleagues on disability inclusive procurement. And the intent is for this document to be a living document that we update as we learn of new and better ways to ensure inclusion through our shared experiences. I would like to end by saying that considering accessibility and the inclusion of persons with disabilities at the earliest stage of your sourcing exercise can have deep and long-lasting impact. It will also save you the additional financial, reputational, and human experience costs to bridging gaps that are identified later on. And most importantly, it will help you start now in ensuring that your procurement activities support and even enhance inclusive and accessible environments and methods of work. So with that, I very much look forward to a rich discussion and hearing your insights today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. Susan, I just looked at my own name. How I wish we were sitting in a real room together in real life. Could I ask the panel members to actually come on for this question and answer time? Is that okay? Jürgen, am I allowed to do that? Because then I can see people and I don't use my own name.
Yes, of course.
All right. Because you started to anticipate my question. I'm hoping that we'll see some Q&A questions in the Q&A channel. But if I could ask one before we go to that channel. I've had so many procurement players, experts, aficionados say to me, it's too hard. And as I listen to you, I'm wondering, how do you persuade colleagues in procurement that it's not too hard and that the value to the business and the sustainability agenda outweighs the task involved in getting this right? I'm going to start with Nitin, please, because I'd be very interested in your perspective. How do you persuade your guys across GSK that, you know, you haven't suddenly woken up as a social worker on a Monday morning?
Susan, thank you for the question. You know, and fundamentally what's underneath that question is business sense. Is this the right thing to do for the business overall? And if you can articulate value and make sure that your own, within procurement, we've got circa 500 odd people who work at GSK, helping people understand what that definition of value is, not just money, which tends to be the easier way of being able to articulate value, and probably I would argue the lazy way, and drawing out the different dimensions. You know, risk is one lens within that same value risk equation, but having the richer definition of value and helping people see what that looks like and the benefit that you can bring to your own organization and to the third-party suppliers and people who interact with us as a business overall is that holistic way in which we have to keep reminding ourselves how we define value. It's not easy. People sometimes do take shortcuts. So for example, if in an RFP process, they don't include the right questions to ask, we will pick them up on it. And as leaders of the function, what we try and do is we set the examples and we help the organization when they stray off piece and bring them back in and just remind them, look, in the last sourcing exercise, you forgot about checking X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and staying on top of that. And then finally, the proof of the pudding is always the business partners we work with. So for example, in GSK's case, if I use Andy as an example, you know, if they're not satisfied with what we've done, then we've not really delivered on the promise, which is to get the best of what's available outside into GSK. That's the premise, and that's how we make the case every day. And yes, sometimes it's carrot and stick both, as all motivations are.
Indeed, indeed. Chris, you've been trying to persuade procurement to only buy accessible stuff for a long time. What do you find are the most persuasive arguments you bring to bear?
You know, it's a great question, Susan, and I mean, it comes down to drilling down when you're in that procurement process, is bringing people with disabilities into the mix. And I think this is so important, particularly in the testing process of choosing a particular product or service. So for example, in some of the work that we do around ICT accessibility, we will work with a city, in many cases, a low-income city, and show them ways in which they could build that business process. And that would include bringing in the vendor, the supplier, and saying, hey, this is why your product is not accessible, and we're going to show you in real time. And that particular solution opens up eyes. So I think that is something to incorporate in the life cycle when you're procuring, because when you look at the individuals in the procurement process, a lot of times they don't understand the full range of the accessibilities and the policies and the needs around that. So you have to connect the two. And sometimes that's very challenging when you're developing those RFPs. So making sure that you have in the life cycle process when you're procuring, particularly ICT related products and services, that you bring in people that know the product from an accessibility standpoint and have tested it.
Well, and what I like about what you're all saying is you have to make it real for the procurement people. Real in terms of the impact on the business. It's going to cost you money if you don't do it right now.
It's what Julia said. It's that retrofitting. That's the last thing that you want to do.
Andy, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, it was picking up on that point about value, carrot and stick, if you like. You know, start with the carrot. I think buyers, procurement's processes are helping buyers to buy the right things into the organization across the enterprise, but they don't know what they don't know. They might just be buying the thing that does their job. And the opportunity here is for procurement and people like myself and ERGs to underscore, to highlight the value added, not just the cost, pounds and shillings and pence or dollars, the value added of underpinning our core values as a company, doing the right thing. Our values of accessibility and inclusion. Accessibility solutions help everyone to be more productive, more engaged, more enabled. It's not only the right thing to do, it makes us a better organization if we're more accessible. And then you come back to the financial argument. We know from the real estate world that it costs 2.5 times more to retrofit an accessibility solution than would if you designed and built it in from the ground up. And there's no reason to suspect that's different elsewhere. I see it in when we're buying learning and development into the organization. We ask external vendors to design training content. So many times we have to then go back and retrofit the accessibility elements of that because the training designers weren't told what our expectations were. That's why we decided to put in standards. So that 2.5 times value add cost, is not to be underestimated. And notwithstanding that, there's the legal compliance piece that we are expected to be compliant in all of our markets and deliver those right. Accessible compliance. You mentioned the European Equality Act. Service providers have got to think about making their services and products accessible.
Well, and of course, when you're operating in multiple jurisdictions, the outfit has to have a high level standard that lifts it above, or it goes crazy trying to figure out what to do at each level. I want to come back to a question now we have in our Q&A section from the audience, because it links directly, Julia, to what you were saying precisely about these issues. It says you've talked about this indicator that procurement policies will ensure that relevant goods and services acquired are accessible or don't create new barriers. How exactly do you assess that? And that's pertinent to the entire conversation. How exactly do you assess that?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's a lot of different areas that we've already discussed, but concretely for the UNDIS Disability Inclusive Procurement Strategy, there's several elements that you need to meet to be considered meeting the requirement. Some of these elements include that there is an established policy, that your procurement does not create barriers. So this really helps from the high level. We second have the fact that your platforms and your tender documents and processes are accessible. How the ILO has done this is that our new ILO e-sourcing platform has been assessed for accessibility to screen readers to ensure the actual platform itself is accessible. And secondly, to make sure the documents that we upload are designed in an accessible, screen reader friendly way. So that's the second of the elements that I was trying to mention. The last being how many of your procurement activities, percentage or number wise, are disability inclusive and having mandatory or preferred criteria on disability inclusion. And so these are kind of the ways that the UN is trying to measure each other and help be accountable to each other and how we're progressing in this area. In terms of how to identify, let's say, the relevant goods or services, our approach has been risk-based, which is a very procurement approach. And with the disability team, we've consulted, this is what the ILO buys. Which areas do we consider the most at risk of exclusion? And so for those, we're trying to create tools, and Nitin was mentioning being really practical. It's creating tools and guidance to help what we call our budget holders and our other colleagues understand what evaluation criteria and what requirements that could serve that particular goods or service area, which we know is very different depending on what you're buying. So I hope in like a nutshell that answers your question, and I'm more than happy to go into more detail for anyone if they would like. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Waithera, you're obviously not a procurement geek, is that the appropriate term? But you've obviously observed this and worked with them quite closely in your organization. Have you any thoughts as to what you expect from procurement when they're assessing a provider?
Yes, I do. I think first you just need to reduce the complexities, because when we sit down with the procurement team, the first thing they tell you is we need to look at the categories, we need to have the KYC documentation done in place, and it becomes more and more complex, harder and harder to get these persons with disability to be onboarded. And so we just say, let us break it down and let's make it as simple as possible to have them onboarded. So yes, there are those categories that are easier for them to be onboarded to. So let's start there. Let's have training and sensitization with the category managers so that we then see what are the barriers there? What are the barriers in, say, one particular category that they are completely averse to, going into that space. And these are the category you have more and more persons with disabilities there. For example, for us, we then have cracked the code with the farmers living with disability. We literally have no other supplier within our value chain which is an organization owned by a person living with disability. So you see, there's already such vast opportunity for our procurement team to sit and say, okay, yes, there are these various categories. How then do we go about it? And even outside of procurement, I find that companies that are sort of have the core elements of being a disability inclusive company, it really is about leadership and governance, because it's not a procurement conversation per se, you know what I mean? And if the leadership, your board and the CEOs are not bought into that conversation, procurement are not going to be the people to stand up and say, I really do want to get more women, more youth, more people with disability. So there's a very big piece on leadership and governance, and that is also guided with policies and procedures. So for us, it's clear we have a target. So every category head has to have a target, otherwise they're just not bothered. We even came up with a mantra where we said, you have to be bothered. No one is going to wake up one day and just say, you know, my heart has really moved me. Today, I really want to empower persons with disability. And that's just the truth about how the space of marginalized people is, you know. And so you have to be very intentional. Another thing that has worked for us is budgeting. I mean, just looking at, we also did an assessment at the plant, we've done an assessment at the office, and you see this variety of gaps. And if you don't budget for it, it's not going to happen. If you don't make your spaces available, accessible, it's not going to happen. And I think a bigger conversation is also around training. You have to train your employees around the areas of attitudinal barriers. You have to train the institution about institutional barriers, and you also have to sensitize the entire value chain on the environmental barriers. Some are unconscious, some are in your face, but training has also been very beneficial for us. So I think I can leave it at that.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock. We have 5 minutes. I feel like we just started this conversation. I want to follow up with a number of you and bring you together afterwards. But for now, final thought here would be, I really like this "you have to be bothered" message. Like you have to bother with this. And the impact of leadership, and where we get the buy-in at the chief exec level. One way we've seen this happen, and I'm going to turn to GSK now, is you've got a global council with senior representation who have launched a global standard. Are you able to say whether or not that standard is going to be shared with the general public? Or at least you can say in 1 minute, Andy, what it covers, including, of course, procurement. And especially if you demute, please. You just wasted 6 seconds.
Okay, yes, absolutely. We'll be sharing it with our service partners and suppliers, because that's what sets our expectations. So the accessibility inclusion standard, in addition to our built environment standard, that's what we send out to our vendors to say, these are our expectations. Excellent. Around accessibility.
Because as far as I've come across, you have the first global procurement commitment to upping your game, right? It's still...
We've got the global commitment across the enterprise. That's why we've got the Global Disability Council, and we have work streams across the enterprise, including...
Sorry, Andy, I was just trying to emphasize that it's also got procurement in it, because that's not customary.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so maybe we could be sharing that across the membership and, you know, and the national business disability networks and so on, as a model for where you go when you're taking that big step with senior leadership. So in the time remaining, I just want to say I'm very encouraged by this. I think it's finding leaders in procurement and leaders in comms able to, to capture the impact of what happens when you get this right for the business and the broader stakeholder group. That is really quite magic. We will, of course, I say we, meaning the Global Business Disability Network, working with G3 ICT, continue to encourage every member of GBDN to have that conversation with procurement that says, why don't you just send out that self-assessment tool, building the disability confidence of your supply chain, just to let them know it's there. Easy peasy. And with the 120 seconds left, I think I'm saying thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Very much enjoyed this. And I'm now going to turn to Jürgen to officially declare this amazing ILO GBDN webinar at an official end.
Yeah, thanks so much, Susan, for giving me a few more seconds just to close this. And I just also want to express the gratitude of the Secretariat of the Global Business and Disability Network, addressing the topic, the very important topic of procurement. And it's great to see, you see here 2 companies. I mean, one of them, GSK, of course, a member of the Global Business and Disability Network, represented by Nitin and Andy, but also East African breweries. Both of them realize how important that topic is. And it's great to have G3 ICT with Chris represented here, and of course also the UN system. Julia gave an insight into the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, which is dealing with from the ILO side. ILO is just one of dozens of entities in the UN system from the procurement side. So we all realize, independent of whether you are not profit, for profit, public sector, private sector, procurement is powerful to advance the inclusion of persons with disabilities. So of course, we will make this webinar available also on our website as a recording, as always. And as a reminder, as I said in the opening remarks, we will launch at our Global Annual Conference 2024, so in November this year, a guide on supply chains, in which we also, again, of course, look at how procurement can be used to advance inclusion, especially also the employment of persons with disabilities worldwide. So thanks so much. Until next time, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.